We got some outstanding presenters for this next plenary session. My name is Maxie C. Jackson III. I'm the station manager for WCPN, which is the NPR public radio station here in serving Northeast Ohio. As I tell people when they ask what do I do as a station manager, I say I don't really do anything creative. I just sort of manage and create space for those who do the work. And so I get the luxury of doing the same today, setting the stage and transitioning between these brilliant women who will wax poetic on the issue of social justice. So I want to give thanks to Case Western Reserve University, the Social Justice Institute, of course, Dr. Rhonda and the entire staff for giving all of us this opportunity to be here today. What a pleasure it is to spend a Saturday afternoon. That's hard for me to say. I'm a big football fan. So what a pleasure it is to spend a Saturday afternoon on the campus in this capacity. And I also want to thank you all in advance for being here, for being attentive, and for the great questions I'm sure you'll ask when we open up this discussion in a little bit. So, you know, when I think of social justice, there's a couple quotes that I kind of hold on to. Tavis Smiley has suggested that the growing disparity and inequality in this country and around the world is perhaps the greatest threat to national and global security. Dr. Rhonda says social justice demands that we recognize oppression in all its guises and diligently struggle against it, guided by knowledge and creativity, seriousness and joy. The previous plenary spoke to the importance of empathy. Empathy is a vital ingredient of social justice. I think the goal, the aim of this plenary is to frame social justice. Last night, Dr. Davis spoke about revolution being a holistic endeavor. She talked about it being much more than something you can undertake in a month, in a year, in a decade even, that it has to become a lifestyle, part of who you are. So as we get this event started, I want to ask the panelists right now to talk to us about how revolutionary act, revolution, if you will, speaks to what they do in their work life and who they are as individuals as a way of providing an opportunity for introduction. Yeah?
Well, I mean that's a hard question to answer. So let me think about it in two ways. One is I don't think we can think of revolution as just something that happens individually in our lives and things that we do to, you know, make the world better in our own lives or for those people around us. But I think one of the things that Angela Davis said last night that was very important, especially for people engaged in social justice work, is the need to be part of a collective. And so I would say that, you know, for myself, you know, I teach at a university now, but I started this sort of journey of social justice as part of a collective. So we all have our individual awakenings, but then recognize very quickly that it's difficult to change the world by yourself and that you have to ally with other people who see the world in similar ways that you do, or at least want to fight for a different kind of world collectively. And so, you know, I was very active in the tenant rights movement in Chicago. I was a tenant advocate working with people to prevent them from being evicted. I actually moved to Chicago from New York City to work with a group also of death row inmates who had been tortured into giving confessions to capital crimes and then were put on death row as a result of those confessions. Those inmates had organized themselves into a collective called the Death Row 10. And through their organizing on the inside and those of us who were able to organize with their family members on the outside, you know, we collectively built a movement that brought the death penalty down in Illinois. And so I think in both of those situations, the need to be a part of a collective was extremely important. So I think that when we think of revolution or revolutionary transformation, that we not just think of it as an individual act, but we think of it as a collective act, and then we think broadly about what is meant by revolution. It's not about just changing this or that thing in this country. Angela Davis ended her talk last night by talking about the need for a radical transformation of this country, and recognizing that social injustice is woven into the fabric of this country. And it means that to be radical, to get to the root of it, means that we have to uproot the entire thing. And so we should think about revolution as what it actually means, and not the way that it's sort of used in commercials that advertise for revolutionary cleaning agents and revolutionary diets. But we're talking about a radical transformation of a fundamentally unjust society. And in order to do that, you have to be a part of a collective. So I'm glad to be here to talk about some of these ideas with people today.
And that's Ms. Keeanga Taylor that you just heard from. We'll hear a lot more from her coming up. I'm going to ask Carol Apestegui. Apestegui?
Yep.
I was close, so close. We're going to ask Carol to take the mic next.
Good afternoon. Well, that's hard to follow, but I'm going to speak a little bit more from the personal perspective. I think revolution, I like to think of it as also evolution. I like to think of it as it's a process that happens as we educate people, educate not only the youth, but everybody in general. The more educated and open-minded people are about the social issues that are happening in the world, the more we can revolutionize the way we're thinking. And that starts not with a movement necessarily, but with every individual. And then, putting those minds together and making a collective effort to inform more and more people. So sessions like these are really helpful, in my opinion, because people that, I'm going to be talking about my personal experience and the subject of immigration. So I enjoy the fact that I can share that with you, because these are issues that the media represents wrongfully a lot of the time. And I think for people to, the fact that you guys are here and are open-minded and are willing to listen to a different perspective, we could say, that's already a revolution. That's an internal revolution, and that's something that if it affects you in any way, that if it catches your attention, hopefully you will be sharing with others. And I think that's how a revolution is started. So,
thanks, Carol. Aisha Bell Hardaway will end these introductions for us.
So I'm going to admit that I don't even remember what your question was.
How does the notion of revolution or revolutionary action intersect with your personal life and your work?
Well, let me just say at the outset that I don't think we've seen a revolution yet. I feel, at least not in my lifetime, let me be clear, not in my lifetime. I feel like we are on the verge, on the precipice of a real revolution. And on a personal level, that makes me extremely anxious, excited, ready, mm-hmm. right? For radical transformation to take place in our society. On a professional level, I'm a law professor, and I feel like oftentimes I'm isolated in a whole bunch of ways because we have to research and write and we think, and I'm always in here. There are instances, though, in my clinical work where I push my students to think radically about the criminal defense work that we do, because there can be, and there often is, there really is a tendency to go along with the motions and to do everything status quo. And one case is the same as the next case. And so professionally, I strive really, and if my students were here, they're working right now, but if they were here, I think many of them would tell you that, I want you to think out of the box. I want each client to get a different level of representation that is uniquely focused on their issues and who they are as a person and what they were confronted with under the certain circumstances that bring them, to a place of needing our help. But that's on a real minute scale, and it's not the type of revolution that I was mentioning at the beginning of my remarks, right? And so professionally, I write and try to push the discourse. I work with my students and try to push the action. But really, the real revolution that I think our society needs, we're on the verge of, but it hasn't yet taken place.
Thanks for those remarks. Aisha Bell Hardaway. So last night, when Angela Davis was getting ready to get on the stage, I snuck up on Dr. Rhonda and I said, Rhonda, what's in this title? Educating for struggle. And so she looked at me and she kind of leaned to the side and she said, revolution, brother. I'm talking about revolution. And so I said, damn, Rhonda's talking about revolution. Okay, so that kind of framed things for me. And so I said, how do I view revolution? And so to me, it's both disruptive and creative. When I say disruptive, I mean disrupting what is common and often distorted in favor of what is normal and sustainable. When I think creative, I think beyond intellectual, but something that we hold in our body and that we, in a physical form, are able to manifest. So revolution as radical transformation is something Dr. Davis also talked about. She said the meaning of the term radical is etymologically to get to the root. And I thought that was such an important statement because it brought up a question that comes to mind for me, and I'm hoping somebody can answer this, maybe in the audience later on, but I'm wondering how revolutionary action is possible when so many of us continue to embrace modalities that neither speak to our nature or our classic orientation. So maybe somebody can help me with that one as we get into this. But we're going to go now back to our panelists because I want to give them an opportunity to frame some of the most pressing social issues that are happening right now. Because after all, this is about social justice. And so I want to give Aisha Bell Hardaway the first stab at framing for us the work she does around social justice. So Aisha, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Maxie. So I just have to say, I appreciate the fact that we didn't do the normal bio intros, yada, 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 Gucci, Prada, whatever, because in large measure, it doesn't get to the heart of why this weekend is so important for me. Those of you who were here last night, like Angela Davis was in our midst, and that's crazy. I mean, for me, that's crazy, especially because I was raised by socially conscious parents, right, who had my hair like this when I was a young toddler and walked around with me calling me Little Angela, right? Like, literally, I really thought, right, it's Aisha or Angela, either A, right? I'm down with it. And so learning about who and what she stands, who she is and what she has stood for, for our people, for women, for the struggle, all of my life, it was just like in awe. And it's not the first time I met her, but it was the first time I was able to string together a conscious thought, right? Like a cogent sentence, because the other times it's kind of like, so I had a little bit of, So I had a little bit of redemption last night, and I was grateful for that. But, as I mentioned before, my work as a law professor gives me, in large measure, I think, great fortune to have the space to write about what's important to me. Some of that has been around the topic of reparations. And I have an article that is coming out any day now at the NYU Review of Law and Social Change that makes the argument as to why African Americans, blacks in America, are owed reparations just by virtue of the relationship that the U.S. government had with blacks after the Civil War, right? So, yeah, there were promises that were made, and those should be accounted for. But aside from that, much like the relationship that the government created with Native Americans at the early beginnings of our country, that kind of relationship of exploitation, domination, and excessive use of resources created a common law trust relationship for which Black Americans are owed reparations. Sounds not radical to this room. I tell you, I say that to other people and folks look at me like, you crazy. Who's gonna pay for it? We weren't even here. I didn't have anything to do with that, right? And these are all, these are learned people who lobby those comments, right? So I spend a great amount of time talking about that, and I hope that the discourse continues there, that the discussion continues there. It lay dormant for a very, very long period of time. If there are any people in the audience who would like to lend their voice, their thoughts, their political muster into elevating the conversation on reparations, please reach out to me. The folks at Black Lives Matters is more than just police brutality. I have had strategists from the movement reach out to me about reparations, and to the extent that there is the possibility for change to happen, I think, again, we are on the verge of that, and so let's not lose this moment. But that actually isn't even what I'm supposed to be talking about today.
It's all good.
Okay. But for the purposes of today, I'd like to discuss another what I consider to be a legal injustice, right? And since, again, the formation of this country, labor and labor rights has been a major issue. And what we know is that historically, the emancipation for African Americans and the rights that workers were asserting coincided very nicely at the same time, right? And so there were analogies often drawn by by individuals in the labor movement between their work conditions and the imposition on their lives by the employers with the employment demands to that of chattel slavery. Let's be clear, I don't think the two are the same. Right? I don't think that labor struggles or that white folks who were working and getting paid during colonial America and thereafter were the same as chattel slaves. Don't misunderstand me, right? But there is an analogy that was used at that time, and the purposes of that analogy actually propelled our country to the 13th Amendment, right? And so Section 1 of the amendment says, right, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, right? There are two strands there. And they weren't thinking about blacks when they were talking about involuntary servitude. They were talking about the worker. And what we know from what my research has shown from the Reconstruction debates is that without that layer of the worker into the 13th Amendment analysis, it wouldn't have passed, right? It wouldn't have passed. The country was gravely concerned about how the workers' rights was going to affect capitalism moving forward in the nation, right? And so the goal was, we're going to even this, we're going to levy this somehow, some way to secure this right. So, with that being said, right, Congress even recognized that the battle was going to be more than just the words in Section 1, the first clause of the 13th Amendment. They recognized that there would be many hurdles and things that they couldn't have even imagined after just the declaration of the end of slavery and no involuntary servitude. And so, in the second clause, they said, and we have the right to pass any legislation hereafter to enforce this amendment, right? They gave some teeth to the amendment in that way. And after the 13th Amendment, sure enough, they passed additional laws, one of which that's really important to this particular work is the Anti-Peonage Act. And the Anti-Peonage Act was made to basically say, in addition to all of the other things, right, chattel slavery, involuntary servitude that we thought about, we won't have you create employment contracts that is, in essence, right, subject our citizens to peonage. All right. We'll leave the 1860s. And bring it to modern day, right? There are now these things called non-compete agreements. And in the non-compete agreement context, right, historically, legally, folks were fine to enter into these agreements because there were high-level executives who had the savvy and the know-how to negotiate contracts. They were paid handsomely, and in the event that they were no longer going to be working with a particular employment, they negotiated what their severance would look like, right? And so the employer who had an interest in making sure that their business interests were protected, and the employee who made sure that they would be able to eat and sustain their lifestyle for whatever period of time, everybody's interests were protected, right? The contract made sense. There was consideration on both sides. Now we see non-compete agreements that are being used between low-pay, low-wage workers and companies in the context that you would never, ever imagine, right? So the New York Times ran two different articles about a year and a half ago about Jimmy John's, right? And so in order to make a sandwich at Jimmy John's, you need to sign a contract, and I don't know if they're still doing it to this day, but they were doing it, you know, when I started this research. You needed to sign a contract that said you wouldn't go work at another Jimmy John's. No, yeah, you had to say that, but they actually said you wouldn't go and make sandwiches at another competing employer for a period of 2 years. So everybody probably is thinking Subway, right? Yeah, well, it's a place where 10% of the rest of the menu includes sandwiches. What? That's the pizza place I worked for when I was in law school. Do you know what I mean? And then the way a sandwich is defined is extremely broad, right? It can be a wrap, it can be a hoagie, it could be it could be pita, it could be. It could be maybe it could be a taco. I bet. Hot dog. Oh, a hot dog, a taco, right? And so Jimmy John's has gotten away with, right? There's no secret recipe, I'm almost certain, for their mayonnaise. And even if there is, right? Even if there is, I don't believe that the person making the sandwich has access to that recipe, right? So why are you preventing me from either securing additional employment or better employment, right? You can fire me. Jimmy John's could fire their worker at any moment, for any reason or no reason at all. And once that severance happens, I'm restricted in where I go to work thereafter, right? The same is true for a lot of college students who return home for the summer and want to go work at the local rec center, right? I'm going to use an example. I do not know this to be true. It's for the purpose of illustration, right? So say my daughter comes home to work at the Shaker Heights City Rec Center, and she does that for a summer without knowing anything, like she probably does most of the time. She signs something without reading it. She's very bright. I don't mean she doesn't know anything, right? But we all sign stuff without reading it, right? She signs something without reading it. Comes home the next summer and decides she wants to go work at the Cleveland Heights Rec Center. Shaker Heights, assuming they have one of these agreements, which I do not know if they do, right, could say, not so quick. You don't get to go work for a competing rec center. That's happening all over the state of New York right now. So those are kind of like, I think, nice illustrations to bring the point home. But what happens when a worker actually does leave employment and is faced with a choice about how to feed their family? I had a client who worked as a home health care aide and signed one of these agreements after she started working in exchange for her paycheck. Talk about undue duress, right? Living very close to the projects in King Kennedy, like across the street. By very close, I mean across the street, right? And supporting a child on her own. Because of no fault of her own, she was injured, told she couldn't work for a period of time. Once she was well and able to work, she said to her employer, "I'm ready to come back to work." They said, "Well, the reemployment process is going to start over as if you were never here before." She's like, "I need a job now." So what does she do? She goes and she secures employment with another home health agency, right? Well, the clause said that if she did such a thing, she would owe the first employer $10,000 per customer. Y'all are outraged. Let me just, just as outraged as I am, that's why I do all of this stuff, basically, you know. So the worst part is, though, she made $10,600 a year.
Yeah.
That's how much she made a year, right? And so in essence, to me, that's peonage, right? In essence, to me, that's peonage. And the lawyer for the agency, the first employer, says to me, "Oh, we're just doing this on principle. We're just doing this on principle." Well, what principles are you standing on? Right? What principles are you standing on? And their goal was specifically to send a message to her former coworkers, right? And so I raised that issue, number one, because I think more of us need to be aware of these non-compete agreements. Number one, I think, number two, I think they're being used across the board in ways that they were never ever intended, especially for the low-wage worker, right? Because ultimately, when you take away my power to decide about who I want to work for, and if I want to pick, maybe employer A is better than employer B, and employer A gives me more flexibility to be at home with my child if they're sick. Maybe employer A is going to give me $1.50 more. Maybe employer A is going to pay for me to continue my education in some sort of reimbursement fashion, right? When I'm foreclosed entirely from the option of pursuing employment A for a period of 2 or 3 years, because that's how long these agreements last, right? For the period of 2 or 3 years, you've essentially foreclosed the worker's right to better or elevate, that's the word I'm looking for, right? To elevate the status of the entire employment workforce, right? So if employer A is attracting all of the employees because they're so good, maybe employer B would step up to the plate and make different choices, right? Yep. So those are my two main reasons for bringing that to your attention today. I think it's really important that we're aware of it. I think that as much as we can, we do what we can to not sign these agreements. And in the meantime, I'm going to do what I can in written form and through motions and through gathering folks across the nation to find the right case to actually bring litigation for in these instances. That was probably way longer.
No, that's good.
Ms. Maxey.
Aisha Bell Hardaway, everybody. Thanks for framing labor in the context of social justice. I can only imagine the intersection with our next speaker. Her subject matter is immigration. Carol, I know you're going to kind of frame your story, your personal story, But before you go into that, I can only imagine how connected the issues must be.
Well, yes, in a lot of ways. Good afternoon. My name is Carol Apestegui, and I'm going to talk about immigration. More hard act to follow, but I'm going to talk from a more personal perspective. I'm going to share my story with you, which by no means does it compare to the stories of more than 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country. I myself went through many years of having no legal immigration status in the country, so I just want to share what that all means personally, because it's easy to hear what the media has to say. It's easy to hear what politicians have to say, what a lot of people share, when they share their stories. But every story is different. So I'm just going to talk from my perspective, and just to give you a better idea of, what things we face on a regular basis, even though we are basically residents, or we consider ourselves residents or citizens of this country, but we are not seen that way by the country, by the community, by politicians, and so on. So I'm just going to kind of read some things that I've written just so I don't miss any points, and then just add things as I go. But basically, like I said, my name is Carol. I'm 27 years old. I was born in Peru, lived in Bolivia for about 8 years, and then my family decided to move to the United States in December of 2001. My father actually came a little bit before that, and then my mom and I joined. We initially came to the country with a tourist business visa, because that's just the easier one to get when you're trying to come, unless you have a direct family member here, which my dad had a brother here who was a citizen, but that's not a direct connection. You have to either have a parent or a child or a spouse. So that didn't work. So we came with a tourist visa, expecting to be able to just, go to the immigration office, maybe get a lawyer, or, do some paperwork and be able to change that into a temporary permanent residency or something of that sort. We had lived in Bolivia for many years, which is a neighboring country to Peru, and it was a fairly simple process. Obviously, it's costly and you have to fill paperwork, but it's something we had done before, and it was nothing new to us. But when we came here, it was completely different. First of all, we tried switching to a student visa for my parents, which would have covered the entire family. That didn't work. We tried. My father tried getting a work visa through my uncle who owns a business. That also didn't go through. He wanted to apply through him as a brother for residency. That process was, we were told that was going to take about 12 years, in which he wasn't going to have a work permit, where he wasn't going to have anything. So either he could stay here and just sit at home, or he could go back to Peru and wait. Well, back at home, he had lost all stability. Both my mom and dad both had jobs, good jobs back at home, and from one day to the next, as you may know, South America is very unstable sometimes. So from one day to the next, they both basically, the industry where they worked just took a wrong turn, and then they both lost their jobs. So for months on end, my parents tried to support the family, have 2 kids in school, well, me in school and my older sister in college, and it just wasn't working. So the next best thing was to try to move again, just like we had done in the past, and we thought this time around, my parents felt like the United States was a good place to give that a try. My family and I are not alone in this. The United Nations state that more than 200 million people have migrated outside of their country of origin in search for economic opportunities, and we're one of those families, just like many others do. Just like from the beginning of history, from the beginning of time, people have migrated. So that's no news. And just think it's funny when I hear politicians like Donald Trump say, let's support these 11 million or 12 million or whatever it is immigrants, just kick them out, and because we can. But if you really think about it, we're part of the community just as much as or as little as anybody wants to think of it. We go to the schools, we work, we drive, we shop in the same stores, and I can't speak for everyone, because obviously there are people who don't have the best criminal records or anything, but most people are good people, just like you, just like a neighbor, just like a cousin, a sister, or anybody who are just trying to make a living, who are trying to get better opportunities for their families. For many years, my parents and I lived without a status, and when we moved here, we left my sister behind. She was junior in college, so we decided to come first, and she was going to join us later. She was going to apply for a visa. Well, maybe a year and a half after we came, she applied for that visa. She graduated from college, and she applied for this visa. She was denied. We had everything for her. She had all the paperwork in place, and it didn't go through. Just happened. So this December, it's going to be 14 years that my mom and I don't see her, and 15 and a half that my dad hasn't seen her. Well, as you can see from that, family separation is a big issue. Personally, nationally, it should be everybody's issue, because you never know when something is going to change, when another, God forbid, the United States economy is not as strong as, it is right now, or the political system is not as strong. You never know when your family will feel the need to migrate to another country, and the least you can ask is that you have at least the opportunity to, become a resident of that country. We're willing to pay our dues. We're willing to, do the paperwork, the required paperwork, go through background checks, go through a probation stage, but we don't even have the chance. I personally don't feel like I have the chance. My only chance would be really marrying a citizen, which I choose to not let that dictate my life, because I think I should choose when I'm ready to get married and who I decide to marry. And if it happens to not be a citizen, then it's not. So, family separation is definitely a big issue when it comes to immigration. I also have a younger brother he's 12. He was born here, so if you do the math, he was born here after my mom and I came. My sister wasn't here, so he had never met her as of June of this year. For the first time, we sent him outside of the country by himself on I think it was like a 9-hour flight to see my sister and meet her for the first time. And that was a really, really emotional time, not just for him, but obviously for the entire family, because even though we couldn't be there, knowing that he was there with her just meant so much for us. When he was younger, it was hard for him to understand the difference between him and his family and his friends in school and their families, because it just didn't make sense how nobody else struggled to get a driver's license or get a job or get an apartment or buy a new car or things like that. Because if you think about it, when you're undocumented, there's no social security number for the most part. Some could have had a status and had that number from then, but there is no social security number. So therefore, just think about how many times you use your social security number and what it serves for you. Well, we didn't have that. Now I do. Thank God I finally do. But I couldn't get a driver's license. It was really hard to get jobs and just go through your regular life. Being pulled over by the police was the scariest thing, because I knew that I was risking being deported on the spot the next day. It's not like you just get a ticket. So some of those things, it was hard for my younger brother to understand why we had to face that, why it was so hard, why we couldn't just fix it, why we couldn't visit the family back at home, why he couldn't see the country that, where we came from. He's a citizen, and, he should have the chance to live his life to the fullest and not be constrained by, whatever is happening with his family. But obviously, he understands that we're in a completely different legal category than he is. Although my family and I continue to, face these difficulties, we've managed to try to manage the best we could to do the best we can in our communities. My mom she's a director for Proyecto Raíces. It's an outreach program based off of Akron, which encourages bilingual education, maintaining the Hispanic culture, promoting participation in educational and cultural events. And I also volunteer with her a lot, but I also have my full-time job on the side, so not as much as she does, but she's very involved with that. So a little background on why now I'm no longer considered quote-unquote undocumented. In 2012, President Obama signed Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals into law. Well, not into law, it's an administrative order. And basically that says that anyone under the age of 15 or above, under the age of 31, as of June 2012, who came to the country before the age of 16, who at that point when he signed that had no legal status, no legal immigration status in the United States, who had been here continuously since June of 2007, who was in school or had a high school diploma or a GED, and who can pass a security criminal background check, would be considered for this program, which would give you a 2-year permit, 2-year work permit, a social security number, which is what I have now. So that right there opens a lot of doors for us. We can get a driver's license, you can get a job and things like that. I was lucky enough that even though I was undocumented, I could attend college and get a degree. And for years I had this degree in my hand, but I couldn't use it because I couldn't, go through a security check at any job that I applied. So I had to do what I could to support myself. Obviously I had my family, but I was 22 and I didn't want to just sit at home and wait for my parents to provide. So that opened a lot of doors for me. Thank you. This administrative order, when this was put into effect, it changed my life radically for the positive. It, like I said, it allowed me to get, a social security number, a driver's license. I could use my degree. It also allowed me to finally rent the apartment I wanted to rent because I could pass the background check that they had me pass. I could, just a few months ago, I finally bought a house. I bought myself a car under my name. I adopted a pet. So those seem like little things for anyone. But in reality, if you think of all the people that are being held back because of the lack of status, who are good people who already live here, but they send all their savings most likely abroad because they have no stability in this country. So just that change from going from, all the money that I had saved, I sent back to Peru and I bought myself a lot. I said, what else am I gonna do? I can't buy a house here. But when DACA happened, I said, all right, finally, let me go get a car. I went and got a car like 2 weeks later, maybe. I started the process, I built my credit, and I bought a house, I bought a pet. So if anybody thinks that we hurt the economy, there's a lot of research out there that will prove that everybody that's under this program is actually supporting it. It's benefiting the economy. We're pumping more money into the economy. And then a little bit of data on the program. When this was passed, about 2 million young adults were eligible. From those 2 million, about 785,000 applied, and about as of March of this year, 430,000 were approved. Because just the fact that you meet all that data, that you meet all that criteria, doesn't mean you get it automatically. You still have to go through a process, background check, and if they find anything that is not fully to the extent that they wanted, you can get declined. So people that meet the criteria but that can't necessarily prove it, I guess, could be declined. They could have been here since they were 5 years old, but if they can't prove that they have been here since then they could, not be approved and be left undocumented. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on was the fact that DACA did affect my life in a very positive way. I feel like it has opened a lot of doors for me, but if you think about it, only 450,000 as of earlier this year have this status, but there's more than 11 million in the country that are still left undocumented. Many people who are good citizens, who are neighbors, who are part of the community, who don't have this chance, who they are in the situation that I was prior to having this status. So those people are, they're being paid under the minimum wage, and a lot of, like the majority of the cases, they're being overworked, exploited. So tying back to, work, that we know that's happening. It's even more with undocumented people because it's really hard to track that because these people have no social security numbers. They're not always, always have the legitimate work records for anybody to prove this, but it's happening, and there's more than 11 million of them. The thought of just deporting that many people, it's just unreal because, first of all, it can't be done logistically. It wouldn't be able to, that wouldn't happen. It just can't happen. But if you think about all the opportunities that could open up if all these people were giving a little bit of opportunity, it would not only help the economy, help the society, but it would just make the country better. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Kara. Citizen Carol, giving us a bit of a transition from immigration, a subject that's often thought of as a brown body issue. We're going to transition to Kianga Taylor, who's going to talk to us about an issue that is often thought of as a black body issue.
So I'm going to talk some about Black Lives Matter, the movement, and the question of economic justice and why we should, for those who are active in the movement and for those who are sympathetic with the movement, need to actually bring those struggles together. So I have just some remarks about that, and then would really appreciate being able to have a more substantive discussion with people in the audience during the discussion. So Black Lives Matter has transformed how most people across the country view police violence in the United States. Before the eruption of this movement, it is safe to say that most Americans viewed police brutality as infrequent and reducible to a bad apple here or there. But in a span of 16 months, the rebellions in Ferguson and Baltimore have not only challenged the injustice in those particular cases, but the mobilization of hundreds and thousands of people beyond those most immediately affected by police violence signified that police terrorism was pervasive in African American communities across the country. Police brutality is today and has been historically a volatile catalyst for Black protest because it, perhaps more than any other injustice or oppression suffered by African Americans, demonstrates the incompleteness of Black citizenship in the United States. When the police can just pick you up for anything, when they can snuff your life out and suffer no penalty or punishment, it demonstrates that you are not a full citizen that enjoys the rights taken for granted by others. But police racism and violence do not exist in a vacuum. In fact, police abuse works in tandem with other inequities experienced in Black communities, the most significant being the economic inequality that exists in poor and working class African American neighborhoods. In other words, police misconduct, police brutality, police surveillance, and all of the other aspects of the American policing state that is found in Black communities keep Black neighborhoods poorer than other neighborhoods, and it keeps Black people poorer than other people. We often think of these issues as separate from each other, but they are connected. In that sense, it is important that we build a Black Lives Matter movement that connects the struggle against police terrorism to the developing struggle against economic terrorism across this country. Not only can Black inequality be measured by unfair and rough treatment in the hands of the police, but it can also be measured by the following. 27% of Black families live in poverty compared to 12% of white families. 33% of Black children live in poverty compared to 10% of white children. 9% of Blacks are unemployed compared to 4% of whites. More than 240,000 African Americans lost their homes because of the foreclosure and subprime lending crisis that began in 2008. The average Black family has approximately $7,000 in wealth compared to $111,000 in wealth for white families. The numbers could go on and include the Black overrepresentation among those who are incarcerated, those who are evicted, those who are without health care, and those who are generally suffering the everyday indignities of racism, discrimination, oppression, and inequality. How then do we bring these struggles together? There are three direct connections between over-policing of Black communities and economic inequality. The first is that when the criminal justice system treats young Black men and women as grist, picking them up for the criminal justice system, picking them up and arresting people for nonviolent drug offenses or for minor misdemeanor or nuisance or victimless crimes in the first place, it leaves them with criminal records that make it difficult, if not impossible, to get legitimate work in the cities they live in. Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow has narrated for the country the severe consequences of criminal records in African American communities and how it removes and how it has the capacity to remove tens of thousands of people from the workforce. And where work is possible, it is usually in the low-wage service sector. As it stands, and it should be no surprise then, that Walmart is the largest employer of African Americans in the United States. Not only do criminal records interfere with one's ability to secure a good job, but felony convictions render you ineligible for financial aid, making it impossible for one to go to college or a university. It threatens to render the same people ineligible for public housing or public housing vouchers or any number of public services that are necessary to survive in this society. In other words, it actively creates a Black market, crime-centered economy by excluding growing numbers of people from conventional means of making a living. In this way, policing actually contributes to the very crime that it claims to be addressing in the first place. And this is happening to Black and brown youth at an even younger age because of the growing number of police in our schools. There are as many as 17,000 law enforcement officers in American schools, but they are not in all of the schools at the same rate. For schools that are more than half non-white and where 75% of the students are poor enough to receive free or reduced price lunches, those schools are more likely to have police in them. The school-to-prison pipeline is real. This is where elementary and high school-aged Black children are subjected to surveillance, citation, and arrest by the growing number of police in their schools, which is now leaving even younger Black people, Black children, vulnerable to the effects of a criminal record. The second way that policing contributes to the impoverishment of Black communities has to do with the enormous funding the institution of policing itself leaches from working-class communities. Over the last decade, Chicago has paid more than $500 million to settle police brutality suits. In 10 years, New York City has paid, on average, $100 million a year to settle police brutality cases. Any other public institution, including hospitals, clinics, libraries, and schools, responsible for that kind of debt and misconduct would have their budgets cut and their employees fired. When the Chicago public schools were facing a $1 billion deficit in 2013, Mayor Rahm Emanuel closed 50 public schools. But no one dares suggest closing police precincts across the city because they are too costly. And so the strangulation of the public sector, while police departments continue to financially thrive, directly contributes to the instability in working class and poor African American communities. Not only does the closure of public schools, libraries, and hospitals, and the downsizing of other aspects of the public sector create particular vulnerabilities in Black and brown communities that are disproportionately reliant on those services, but it also results in job losses for tens of thousands of middle-class African Americans in particular who have relied on the public sector for solid employment. Finally, as the federal government contributes less and less to the local governing of particular cities, it has left those cities on their own devices, to to raise revenue for their functioning. Over the last several years, this has led municipalities to turn to ever-growing uses of fees and fines to generate income. This is insidious as vulnerable populations, those deemed as having fewer rights, or at least fewer rights that anyone cares about, as targets for the police for ticketing and the issuing of citations. In Ferguson, fines and fees became the second leading source of revenue over the last several years. It meant that local police and the local criminal justice system needed to issue tickets to even be able to pay the police and other city administrators. In 2013, the St. Louis suburb, Ferguson, issued 33,000 minor crime arrest warrants for a population of 21,000, and most of those were for traffic violations. In 2014, the New York City government relied on $10 million a week that were brought in on parking citations alone based on handing out roughly 16,000 tickets. The city makes almost $1 billion a year in court, criminal, and administrative fines beyond the tickets for what police refer to as quality of life offenses that are disproportionately given out to blacks and Latinos. This is kleptocracy masquerading as law enforcement. It is the imposition of a race tax directly responsible for keeping black and brown people poor and under the threat of the criminal injustice system. Ending the regime of police surveillance and scrutiny and the hundreds of thousands of fines, citations, and arrests that are the result and directly tied to dramatically improving the quality of life in black communities. That has to be a priority of the movement. But the movement can not only say what it is against, it also has to articulate what it is for. And there are many things that we could say about that, but one of them has to be an immediate increase of the minimum wage to, at the very least, $15 an hour, while also granting all low-wage workers the right of collective bargaining as a way to increase their incomes consistently. It means advocating for the robust funding of the public sector, even if it comes at the expense of the police. And finally, if we talk about beyond that, the question of, in terms of not just thinking about what we can do in the immediate sense, what is the most possible in the immediate sense, but as Angela Davis said last night, thinking about the impossible, expanding the parameters by which we think about what, not just what the world is, but what kind of world do we actually want to live in? When we think about the question of liberation, and in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, the aspiration of black liberation cannot be separated from what happens in the United States as a whole. Black life cannot be transformed while this country burns all around it. The fires consuming the United States are stoked by the widespread alienation of low-wage and meaningless work, unaffordable rents, suffocating debt, and the boredom of poverty. The essence of economic inequality is borne out in a simple fact. There are 400 billionaires in the United States and 45 million people living in poverty. These are not parallel facts. These are intersecting facts. There are 400 American billionaires because there are 45 million people living in poverty. Profit comes at the expense of the living wage. Corporate executives, university presidents, and capitalists in general are living the good life because so many others are living a life of hardship. The struggle for black liberation, then, is not an abstract idea molded in isolation from the wider phenomenon of economic exploitation and inequality that pervades all of American society. It is intimately bound up with them. So while we must think about the movement today and changing the conditions under which people live and work today, we must also see this as a longer struggle to transform the fundamental nature of the society we live in. A system, a society that is not based on poverty and inequality, where the police are used to monitor the consequences of that poverty, but a society where human need and human development is the objective of the collective whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Kianga. Why don't we ask you to step to the mic if you have any questions and or comments you'd like to make. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. We'll start on the left.
My name is Pierre Napier. I'm co-founder of the New Black Democratic Party of Cuyahoga County, 137 bullets strong. Don't sound like you was talking about America to me. Does not sound like you was talking about the United States of America. America is fighting all over the world. But the real fight, World War III fight, is taking place right here in America right now on the 14th day of November in the year 2015. Let me go a little bit further. The white Jesus with blue eyes and long hair that the racists honor, the white racist Jesus that these churches honor in America. I'm gonna say it again, because I need to bring attention and document what you just said, my friend. The white Jesus with blue eyes that they're gonna honor on the 25th day of December is what you're talking about. Black Americans are not Americans. The ISIS movement has surrounded the black community in the way of the white police departments.
What's your point?
My point is that as a black American, I cannot walk the streets worried about being killed by the white civilian police department. Right here in Cleveland, Ohio, where they used 137 bullets to kill 2 black Americans. That's what I'm talking about. Our lives are at risk here. And I'm gonna say this one more time because I think it's important. The blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus, the racist Jesus that white people honor is killing America.
All right.
Thank you. Gentlemen? Sir, on the right.
So there's a few things that could be said and a few questions that I have. I'm going to try and
Yeah, speak.
Can you speak up just a little louder?
Am I okay? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes,
good.
Okay.
that's better.
There's a few things I have a concern about. Of course, myself as a African American, slavery is still kind of operating here, and I wonder if the three of you could speak to how we can really draw the attention back to that. The template was put down pretty well. There's a slave mentality still operating, as well as the master mentality that's still operating, where if you are black, as we've already talked about, as you all have already talked about here, if you're black, you're gonna go to jail. If you're black, you're gonna, you're gonna do what we tell you to do, and if you don't, we're gonna make an example out of you so that everybody else falls in line. And it's still happening. There's a lot of people who want to say that slavery ended whenever it, and it still didn't end with the civil rights movement. So I personally am stepping in to my own life as trying to do some things about changing some of these things. Revolution is definitely, something that I'm very interested in, because I can't continue to watch this kind of thing. The internalized racism that we have for ourselves that was put in place during slavery, and the way that we raise our children, and we as children be raised by people that don't know how to father, which is why we have an organization that just was in the first group, which I appreciate that. I feel fortunate that I'm not dead. I feel fortunate that I haven't been incarcerated. And that kind of thing is not something that should be considered as a normal. Those two things are not normal. People don't just go to jail. This stuff is it's not talked about in a way where the people who deny that slavery template still exists, that master mentality still exists, and the people that deny that, I don't know what world they actually live in, and I really want to figure out what I as a person can do, speak to, educate these other people, because I can't tell you how many times I have been called the N-word by non-African Americans, and the African Americans, I tell them, please, I have to beat you up if you're gonna call me that, unless you're gonna be my friend.
Can we allow someone to answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Go ahead.
So if I understand it correctly, right? I mean, let me say at the outset, right? As much as I love talking to folks and having dialogue with folks, it's not my job to raise grown people, right? And I avoid having discourse or conversations with people, especially if they think they're gonna call me the N-word, right? And so to the extent that certain folks aren't convinced or aren't aware, right? I don't know necessarily that I would waste my breath. With that being said, right, I think that there is definitely power in speaking truth, right, in spaces where you can mobilize, where you can create a movement, and where you can raise consciousness, right? We just have to be very wise and selective about where those spaces are, right? And so out of all of the things I heard you identify, or that you listed off, right? Those are what, in my world we call badges and incidents of slavery, right? Those are badges and incidents of slavery, and the Supreme Court has said they're not supposed to exist in this nation. We all in this room, I hope, are aware that they still are alive and well, right? And so it's our job to try to identify and root them out in the ways that we can as a people, right?
Yep. Anyone else want to comment? Or do we want to move to the next question?
I just wanted to say something quickly, because this comes up frequently. Badges and incidents of slavery are not slavery. Slavery does no longer exist. And I think that it's important because it acknowledges the heroic struggle that black slaves led to end slavery in the first place, and calls attention to understanding the way in which racism operates in our society today. We have a thoroughly and completely racist society in the United States, but it's not slavery. And it's important to distinguish the difference between the two, because it also diminishes what slavery actually was. And so I say that also because I think what also diminishes the understanding of the rootedness of racism in our society is the idea of a slave mentality of why can't black people just get it together, is disconnected from the extreme way that racism has undermined and contorted and distorts black life and black communities. It's like Obama standing up, chastising black families on the south side of Chicago about men not acting like men without having a corollary discussion about the ways that the police and the criminal justice system disappear black men through police brutality and the over-policing and hyper-surveillance in black communities. You cannot talk about one without talking about the other. And so having a historically minded people means actually getting back to talking about the systemic roots of the inequality and discrimination that is happening in black communities.
That's good.
Thank you very much. I know Dr. Rhonda went around and probably whispered in everyone's ear. We know that there are activists, there are folks heavily engaged in the struggle already, and we appreciate the fact that you've got stories. But let's lean on the expertise here on the deck. And please make your questions specific to this group, and let's proceed. Which side are we going to? Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your remarks. I think one of the threads that was consistent through the speakers is the question of citizenship and enfranchisement. And my question is about both institutions that you think are maybe targets for organizing right now, and where politically we can be peeling back white supremacy when we talk about the complete commodification and securitization of warehousing of black and brown bodies. This is a very thorough system. So I'm curious if there's any institutions that you think of that come to mind that you think are targets and areas that need to be organized upon kind of in the near term.
Kara, you want to grab the mic on that one?
Could you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, so I guess in the context of the president signing this executive order, do you feel that this is a kind of maybe that the federal government's like the most effective place to be putting kind of our attention on ending kind of warehousing and incarceration of immigrant families? But that kind of goes to each of the speakers' points.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a step in the right direction. A lot of activists maybe wouldn't agree with me that fight for immigration reform for something more broad, but I think if something more broad is going to take another 30 years, I will take a little step that helps me, that gives some sort of relief right now. I think what President Obama did is not the solution. It's like putting a Band-Aid, but that Band-Aid is providing relief to a lot of families, and it's a step in the right direction. Like I said, personally, I can just go on and on about all the benefits that it brought to me, and I know that that's the story for I think the number I said was like 430,000 people. It's affecting positively, and I think hopefully the more and more time this goes on, the data will come out and show citizens that there's no reason to be scared of these immigrants. These immigrants are part of the communities already. So to answer your question, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think that it's a positive move. I think that there's another program, there's DAPA, which is Deferred Action for, I can't think of the exact word, but it's for the parents of citizens or young residents. And this program was stopped. That program would have helped my parents who are still in that immigration limbo. And that would change their lives so much if that went through right now. They're both very intelligent, very capable people, and they have no chance of using that, no chance of contributing more than they do. They already do, in their limited capabilities, but there would be so much more if that went through. And it's stuck right now because of racism. A lot of politicians are saying, oh, that's amnesty. Well, no. First of all, it's not for everybody. You have to meet a really tight criteria. You have to go through a lot, and you don't get that much for it.
Anybody else on the panel want to respond to that? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Connie. Ms. Carroll, your story, I don't want to butcher your last name. Your story was so touching. But I have a quick question in regards to Black Lives Matter and in regards to the police brutality that we've suffered here in Cleveland and truly across the United States. In the demilitarization of our police departments, is Black Lives Matter or the Cleveland 8 looking forward to putting forth some litigation or legislation to deunionize our police departments, be it that is the cold blue shield that they hide behind whenever they do something that they're not supposed to be doing?
Great question.
In addition to that, can we also put together laws that'll stop these rogue police officers from being able to jump from one city to the next? If you're unfit to be an officer in my city, you're unfit to be an officer in any city. There's no reason in the world why we should be allowing them to jump from one city to the next and commit the same atrocities over and over again and get promoted in the interim.
Are you a part of Black Lives Matter? Are you in the movement? Are you in the movement? You are in the movement? Yeah. Okay. So let me just say, there are members of the Cleveland 8 here. That question should be posed to them directly. As much as I support the movement, I am not a part of the strategy for the movement, and so I can't answer that question directly, right? I want to make sure that there's a difference, right? Or that distinction is made. But I do want to say that those options are very good suggestions that should be posed, right? Right? And so, Kyan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I don't have some official title in the movement, but the movement is all of us. The movement, you know, the movement belongs to all of us, and we have to fight back against this sense of proprietorship within the movement that, you know, some people get to speak and other people don't. If you're Black, brown, and care about social justice and what's happening in this country, then, you know, you should consider yourself part of the movement. And I think that there have been some loose demands, and the issue of police unions is a specific one that has come up. But I think, you know, it does speak to a kind of larger issue in the movement right now, which is that there aren't any central demands. So that you have different locations and some different organizations that have put out their own demands, but not like a core group of demands that we can rally around nationally. And so that, I think, needs to happen. And I think the issue of police unions, which unfortunately often work in tandem with the leadership of, you know, elected officials in municipalities, they're often working together to shield corrupt and brutal police. And I think that is, you know, part of the thing that we have to take up. If we consider the movement also as a space and people who have the capacity to educate the wider public about the really harmful role played by police unions, which I think most people don't know. And I also think this is part of the problem with just firing cops who brutally assault, beat, and kill people instead of charging them. So like in the black man who was killed by police in Florida when he was on the side of the road changing his tire, and some cop in an unmarked car, no badge, no identification, no identifying himself, shoots 6 rounds and kills the man. Well, he was fired yesterday. Okay, but you know, he actually killed someone. And so when they're just fired, it makes it easier for them to then just go to another department and it's business as usual. And so I think that's why also we have to advocate for charging these police, not just for murder, but for all the criminal activity that they're involved in.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Tammy Kennedy, and I'm somewhat of a social justice activist. I have a question for Dr. Kianga. What do you think, why do you think we are not fighting as Black people for reparations? Or do you think we should be fighting for reparations? And then part 2, Dr. Aisha, from a legal perspective, how and what if you believe we should have reparations, should we be doing to get reparations?
Thank you. Either one of you.
Okay, I'll respond to part one. Why are we not fighting for reparations? Well, I think that we're at the very beginning of what will probably be a long-term, long-standing movement. And I think probably the main reason why, perhaps the issue of reparations doesn't resonate quite as largely yet in Black communities is one, do people think of that as a viable target, as something that is actually winnable? And that has to do with the level of organization that is built up around it. And so when Dr. Black said earlier in the first panel that there is a vacuum of the left, what that is really about is what is the strength and level of independent political organizations that exist that can advocate and articulate a set of political demands that are representative of the community as a whole. And so that doesn't necessarily exist right now. And what we have are the most established organizations often tend to be very focused on either particular issues or focused on electing people to various offices and not necessarily taking up these types of demands. So I think that one of the things that Black Lives Matter as a movement has produced is a proliferation of organizations that are starting to sort of organize around a set of demands that go beyond the typical things that we're used to seeing. And so I think the time is actually ripe for an actual fight and struggle around the demand of reparations that is not just happening here, but is becoming increasingly more vocal and loud in Caribbean countries as well.
So I'll try to be brief. I guess I actually disagree with both the premise of the question and my co-presenter, right? Because I think that the struggle for reparations, people have been fighting for reparations for a very, very long time. And James Foreman's, with the Black Manifesto, this is not new. The conversation has continued in a different way, and I alluded to this in the beginning of my remarks, right? Is that, okay, now there's more popular, maybe attention being made to the topic of reparations, but there have been people fighting in this struggle for a very, very long time. And lawsuits have been filed by numerous organizations, some of the biggest and the brightest legal minds, Black, white, Jew, whatever, for the last 25 years. And they failed because our courts actually just stimulate us at every turn. So the argument that I make in terms of the common law trust relationship is another legal avenue, right? But that legal avenue needs to be taken in tandem with something else, and that's the political power that the current movement has, right? So that, like the Holocaust victims, like Native Americans whose land and resources were ripped away from them, like so many other people groups that have actually been afforded reparations in various different forms, that Black people across the world would actually receive their due. We're the only people group. Right? The Aboriginal in Australia and Canada, and in so many different ways, other people have been compensated for the injustices that they have bared, right? But folks from the transatlantic slave trade have yet to see any recruit there. So the first answer is I disagree, right? I think that we have been fighting for a very, very long time, and I think the popular movement is a chance for the fight and the political power to become more indifferent than it has been in the past.
Before we go back to the audience, I want to ask each of you to give us either a website or a publication that you think can help are being informed on the issues that you've brought up. Carrie, you want to begin?
Sure. So there are a few local activist movements in support. More than anything, it's like an immigration support system that we have built. There is Dream Activist, which is a national group, but there's Dream Activist Ohio, which I'm a part of, and we just try to provide information and support to anyone in going through this process or family members of anybody that is going through this. So the website, I believe, is dreamactivistohio.com. But if not, if you type that into Google, you can find that. There's also America's Voice. They do a lot of work in support of immigration fairness, I guess I could say. There's a lot of different topics, but just immigration fairness overall. So if you would like to follow them, they also do a lot of work, activist work, and continuously send emails informing about what's going on. So there's two.
Kienga, I know you have a book coming out very soon, so certainly you'd want to reference that. But what else would be a good resource?
So yeah, I have I finished a book titled "From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation," which is published with Haymarket Books. Will be out in January 2016. And then I think in terms of websites, there's so many. I don't know. Maybe it will.
Hands Up United.
Hands Up United is a good. It's definitely a good. It's definitely a good website. Jacobin Magazine, which has a whole range of articles online and in print that take up various debates in different social movements, but Black Lives Matter debates about the movement. For sure is a good resource as well.
Aisha, you think something yet?
No, you caught us off guard with this question.
I'm surprised.
So, and I don't. There's a national council for reparations that I don't know the website for, and there's like 3 other words to that name. I'll get it if you guys want to.
The power of Google.
Break. Right. I have an op-ed piece in the New York Times that was published last month. This November, last month. And then I have an article on reparations that is attached on the SSRN link on my bio page at the law school.
Wonderful.
Those
That's
off
good.
the top of
That's great. Thank you. Back to the audience. Questions, please.
Yeah, my question was for Professor Hardaway, and
Can we speak a little closer to the mic?
sorry, she kind of touched on it, but it's a little different. I'm more concerned or curious about racial classifications and how those play a role in the battle for reparations on determining who is black and how, like, the history and who actually is going to get reparations.
No, that's great.
Thank you for that.
That's a great question, right? Yeah, and so for the purposes of my research, I did something real neat and simple, right? And I realized that the issue is much broader than what I proposed, right? I think an easy way to start this discussion is to say anybody who can show a connection to a relative through either census records, family history, genealogy, whatever, right? All you need is one family member to show that connection, and then everybody in that family is of the eligible class. That's the neat answer, right? But the type of reparations that I address, right, for what occurred during the Reconstruction, right after slavery, is only reparations for that. I don't mean to insinuate that addresses all of the other injustices, right, that folks who, black, brown, whatever, have come to our country since that time. Right? And so if that's perhaps what you're touching upon, right, I think that's another struggle for the same time. I just don't pretend to have spoke to that before. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ma'am?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I just wanted to thank all of you for coming out and sharing your expertise with us. My question is for Aisha Hardaway. And it is, you touched on the 13th Amendment as it relates to labor rights in terms of abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude. But as you are probably aware, most people don't continue to read that sentence that says, except for crimes and punishment. So slavery actually does exist, it's just for crimes and punishment, notwithstanding all of the other stuff around it, but the Constitution does actually sanction it. And so my question is, do you, either through activism or in your research, actually touch on anything related to the penal system and how slavery does exist for the current inmates?
Not in this piece. Not in this piece, but it certainly is a follow-up piece, right? What we know about prisoners and whether or not they have a right to a wage and what that wage looks like and how at different times you have to work to actually secure a bed. I mean, to bring in the thread for immigrants, for individuals who are being detained while their status is being evaluated, you hear about them, not only are they losing their homes and all of the things that have happened, that they've accrued before being ripped from their communities, right? But then when they find themselves in these detention centers, they're being made to work for a cot, right? And so if you do a certain type of work, and I think the government regulation that sets the dollar amount for this, which I think is like at $1.51 or something like that, hasn't been amended or made more up to date since like the 1950s. Right, and so in large measure, right, what you're saying, for some folks, it does still exist, and the Constitution makes that. And thank you for, I actually had that idea before, but thank you for remembering me, helping me remember my next article idea.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hello. Hello, my name is Maya Jones, and I wanted to ask, because earlier you brought up poor taxes in one form or another. I recently read an article about the RTA basically trying to fund themselves off of disabled people's paratransit rides and increasing by another quarter, which is a lot if you ride the bus every day, all day, for most of its other riders. Because when we talk about this, it's usually in a large ideas and not specificity. I'm wondering what other ways in which poor taxes are put on our communities that we don't acknowledge or don't really bring to the table in conversations such as these, and how we can eradicate them as a form of reparations.
There are really too many to name. I mean, there are some that are more egregious than others. I read about cases in Texas where truants were being tried as adults and having to pay, I think the state of Texas made $16 million on fines from truants and their parents. There's things like, in Alabama, not Alabama, there's North Carolina charging people for the use of a public defender, which of course defeats the purpose of having a public defender. The New York Times sent a reporter to a courtroom in Alabama and found that basically people were being threatened that if they didn't pay the various fees and fines that they owed on traffic and other nuisance crimes, that they would be sent to jail, which of course is illegal. There was a Supreme Court case in 1983 that essentially said that debtor prison doesn't exist in the United States, and you cannot be sent to jail for an inability to pay a fine, not a refusal to pay a fine, but the inability to pay a fine, which then means you have to have a hearing to determine your financial abilities. And so, often in order to actually fight some of these obvious legal injustices, you have to have resources and money to do so, which the absence of the courts in some of these cases rely upon to threaten people and to put people into jail. And so I think one of the things that Ferguson has done is to highlight that this is something that is happening. It became very big news, the way that the city administration in Ferguson was really abusing its black population based on the sort of citations and fines and fees. But then it also came to light that, well, Ferguson is not an exceptional place, that this is happening all over the country. And so I think that as the movement continues to grow and develop, that this is one of the, I mean, this is why I talked about it, this is one of the economic issues, the issues of economic justice that have to be connected, because it is directly connected to disproportionate rates of impoverishment in black and brown communities. And so it's very much linked to a more broad sense of social justice.
I'm not going to respond. Dr. Rhonda's being so patient right now.
All right, our last question.
Okay, I have permission. It's not a question, but I'm speaking to Professor Hardaway, and I'm also speaking to the moderator, facilitator's question about books you could recommend. So far as reparations are concerned, write this down, everybody. Look up Tim Weiss. He has spoken at Tri-C. He believes that until Caucasians accept the fact that they're the problem, and until they accept it and claim it, nothing will change. Also, I would like to tell you about a book. It's my favorite of all favorites, of someone that went to Shaker Heights High School, graduated, and know very little about history. Not that they didn't teach it, but it didn't interest me the way it was taught. It's the winner of an American Book Award, the Anisfield Wolf Award in 1994. It's entitled A Different Mirror. It's the voices and the recounting of multicultural America from the perspective of the minorities themselves. That's a first, okay? And it's a timeline, and they represent in a sequential order, Native Americans, African Americans, pre- and post-slavery era, the Irish, the Mexicans, the Chicanos, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Jews. The author, who is Ronald Takai, who passed just very recently. And I say that because I believe on page 60-something, I think he mentions my grandfather. And I put it off so long to try to contact him by his website. He had passed, and I really regret that. I can't hear you.
Spell the last name, please.
Oh, okay. Where is it? T-A-K-A-I, Ronald, first name. And the only other thing I want to speak on is that he talks about, he surmises at the end where minorities are when he finished his book in 1993. He talks about the Chinese Exclusion Acts being created to protect white labor, speaking about the accusations about Hispanics taking jobs away from Americans. It's very apropos, and you will love it. This will be my fourth reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Let's thank the panel, everybody.